let's move on to main topic number 1. And our first main topic today gets submitted to us by Tyron Edwards, who writes, "Hey, John, love the show." Thank you so much, Tyron. "According to the Wall Street Journal, in 3 weeks of the digital release, Trolls sequel, which is Trolls World Tour, has made more money for Universal Pictures than the original did during the 5 months in theaters," which is actually completely factually incorrect. But we'll get to that in a minute. "With this being such a digital success, will studios put more blockbusters out on VOD for the time being? Thanks, and bring on the filthy." All right, thanks a lot for that, man. And yes, I was taken aback and confused. I even put out a tweet about it yesterday saying, somebody, wait a minute, time out. Somebody explain this to me. Because the Wall Street Journal came out and made a broad sweeping proclamation that Trolls World Tour, that of course went straight to VOD, has made more money in its first 20 days than it did in all of its theatrical run, which I thought was interesting. It was interesting that they would say that because it's completely factually untrue. So I'm not really sure which angle they were. I don't know if Wall Street Journal was saying, well, it's made more than just the domestic run of it did after you consider the X, Y, and Z or whatever, but it's just factually untrue. Now, not to Wall Street Journal, I'm sorry, Universal's been coming out and making these grand proclamations and taking a victory lap about the success of Trolls World Tour on digital. But as Forbes properly points out in questions, is it a hit? The actual answer is no. This movie is taking massive financial losses. Now, we're going to go ahead and use the numbers here. We're going to look at something here. And we are just going to use the numbers that were in the Wall Street Journal article itself, okay? This is where these numbers are coming from, and I verified them at other sources as well, but we're going to take the numbers from the Wall Street Journal article itself. Let's actually look at how Trolls World Tour has actually done, all right? Let's take a look at this. First of all, the production costs, some say as low as 90, some say as high as 102. Most of the reliable sources, I said, the production cost of Trolls World Tour was actually right around the middle there, $95 million. Which actually, you know what? Good on them for making a big feature-length CGI animated film for $95 million. Actually, kudos to them for that and keeping, because a lot of these films you hear is $160 million to make it. They made it for $95 million. Kudos to them. So the production cost was $95 million. Now, the revenue after, and somehow I forgot to put in a T in the word after, revenue after the streamers cut, because remember, the streamers keep a cut. Some keep higher cuts like iTunes, some take lower cuts, but on average, it averages out to about 20%. So after the streamers cut, the amount of revenue that Trolls World Tour has made on its streaming after 20 days is $77 million. It's roughly 95 before the cut. After the cut, it's about 77, their math says. Okay, so the movie has made $77 million. The marketing spend, now Universal put out a number that said they only spent $30 on the marketing. Deadline put out a report saying, no, the industry insiders are saying they spent nearly their full marketing blow of $80 to $100 million on the marketing of the movie. So let's split the difference there. Actually, let's even lean a little bit more towards Universal. Let's split the difference and say $60 million. All right. Deadline is saying the industry is saying they spent 80 to 100. Universal says they spent 30, which I don't believe for a second. So let's split the difference and let's say $60 million they spent in their marketing. Okay. Now, Hulu signed a deal with Universal for the streaming rights to Trolls World Tour. Now, I've read some reports that said that deal was worth as low as $10 million, but I did read one or two that said it was worth $25 million. So let's go in Universal's favor here. Let's go on the high end, and let's say that Universal is going to get $25 million from Hulu for the streaming rights to the movie once a certain period of time has passed. So that's $25 million for them, okay? So, with the production costs and the marketing spend, they spent $155 million on Trolls. Their total revenue, including the $25 million credit they're going to get, that we will credit them for the Hulu streaming deal, right now is $102 million. Ladies and gentlemen, as of right now, Trolls World Tour for Universal Studios is a $53 million loss. Let me repeat that number again. A $53 million loss right now. Now, they're not done. They're not done. They're gonna make some more money moving forward, but the vast majority of the lion's share of the money they're going to make, remember, we're already including in their streaming deal, is already done, and they're still $53 million in the hole. They're still $53 million in the hole. And that, Rob, was with, this is the funny part, that was with a lockdown, theaters closed, everybody stuck at home, schools closed, and the kids are all at home. With all of that in their favor, with all of that working in their favor, they're still $53 million in the hole on this. And yet Universal has been out there taking a victory lap. Even though the fact that there's a lockdown, there's a pandemic, everybody's stuck at home, everybody's looking for more entertainment, the kids can't be in school, they're at all home too, we got to get something, blah, blah, blah. Even with all that, they're still $53 million in the hole, and they're running around with their Universal flag taking a victory lap around the course. It's like, good for you. In my best Christian Bale voice, good for you. Well done. With everything possibly, with the stars aligning to work in your favor, you're still $53 million in the hole. It is, Rob, the definition of a PR spin. It is the definition of a PR spin. And I should bring up this, if I can find this here quickly. Oh, here we go. I want to bring up this thing that NATO then put out. Well, you know, yeah. Let's do this. I want to, you know what? No, we'll save that till later. Rob, anyway, you hear these numbers being thrown around. You hear all this kind of stuff. I guess the part of the question I ask is, why not just say, yeah, it's doing better than we thought, rather than all the posturing and grandstanding? This is a movie that at the end of the day is going to lose money, even with all these circumstances lining up in their favor, and it still couldn't be profitable. I don't know. You take a look at this, Rob. I need to know your angle on this. What do you see here?
Well, from what here's I guess my take on it's a little bit different in the sense that they were talking. The way I read this was they weren't talking about the profitability of the movie overall. They were talking about the fact that Universal was able to take more money in rentals in for the distribution of this movie on pay VOD than if they had released it theatrically. Because if you look at those numbers that you cited, and they're all, according to what I have in front of me too, they're accurate, but they don't take into consideration the production cost of the movie or anything like that. The article, like in this Deadline article, talks about just the rentals. And the point I think they're making is that Universal, because they pretty much distributed it themselves for the most part, were able to make more money, like $20 million more money than they would with a split with the theaters. And I think that's the real bone of contention here is the point. Their point they're making is that it doesn't work if your movie like No Time to Die, which cost $250 million. We're not there yet. But a movie like Trolls, they're showing that, well, see, if we distribute this ourselves and do it on pay VOD, we can take in more money on rentals than we would if we just distributed it theatrically. And because they've still got, there's other ancillary markets and everything. And I think that was what the theater owners were basically pissed off about. Like the studio, basically what they did yesterday was they came out and they said, see, by cutting out the middleman, which is you movie theater owners, we don't have to supply their threat. I mean, they didn't come right out and say this, but Universal was basically saying, yeah, you know, we could make $10 or $20 million more in profit if we just distributed our movies like this ourselves. We don't have to do it in theaters. And the thing about that is there's been a long-standing status quo between theater owners and studios that the theater owners are to understand that, yes, the theater owners want to make sure there's at least a 3-month window before you start putting things on pay-per-view or putting things out on home video, because it's not just first-run theaters, it's second-run theaters, it's theaters in more rural environments where where people can still see these movies as they spread out across the country, because a lot of people don't live near multiplexes or big cities, so they have to wait until the movies make it to their small towns. And John, I found out when we went to CinemaCon last year, I talked to a lot of rural independent theater owners, and that was a whole world I knew nothing about. So I had some fascinating conversations, and what Universal was basically saying was, screw you guys. We don't have to put these kinds of movies in theaters. And movie theaters, like, we don't just want A-list blockbusters. We also need these movies that are family films that'll play for 3 and 4 weeks as families keep coming to see these films. And, movie theater chains can only live and die if they're supplied with movies by the major studios. And Universal is a major studio. And they basically were saying, well, you know what, if it makes more sense, maybe we won't release movies and like Trolls World Tour to theaters.
Yeah, but it was even that position that they were taking was so disingenuous, because it assumes two fallacies. One, the first fallacy was they only relegated their figures to one market, which was the North American theater. Trolls, right, the first one, actually made $350 million.
Yes.
Worldwide. And so for their account, they said, let's compare what we've made on all of our rentals, but only compare it to the North American release only. That's disingenuous claim number one.
Yep.
The second disingenuous claim they make is this thing that even a bunch of the trades are buying into. This whole thing that the theaters and the studios do a 50-50 split. That is factually not true. Now, at some point, because what happens, Robin, you know this, there is a levitating scale that happens the longer that a movie is in theaters, right? So when a movie first comes out in its first weekend, the studios make a certain percentage and the theaters make a tiny percentage. The longer the movie is in theaters, the higher the percentage that the movie theaters get to keep. So for instance, in week 4 of a movie being in theaters, the theater gets to keep a larger chunk of that ticket price than it did in week 1. So it's an elevating scale as they go. At some point, yes, it does become a 50-50 split. But in that first week of release, Rob, it is not unusual for the studios to keep 90% of the ticket price,
yeah,
and the theaters only keeping 10%. And when does a movie make the vast majority of its money? In its first week or two. So yes, eventually, the longer it's in theaters, the more and more of the profit or of the ticket price that the theaters keep. But at the end of the day, the way it all shakes out, and again, this is what they told me when I was at AMC Theaters, was roughly works out to about 33%. That's really the keep. So there's two big fallacies here that Universal's trying to purport. One, they're comparing their global rentals versus just one domestic theater take. And then 2, they're trying to perpetuate this idea that it's a 50-50 split. It's not a 50-50 split. It has never been. The theaters would love for it to be a 50-50 split, but it's never been that way. And here's the part that concerns me, is that when you've got, if I'm Universal, here's my big concern, that if we were under normal circumstances, no pandemic, no lockdown, everybody can go to the theaters, kids are in school, all that kind of stuff. If we were in normal circumstances and Universal tried taking Trolls World Tour straight to VOD and it made them $95 million before the cut of the streamers, I'd say, you know what? That's way better than I would think that they would do. But if I'm Universal right now and I see that we made 95 million, really 77 after the cut, and we did have everybody stuck at home, and we did have the kids not in school, and we did have a full theatrical marketing campaign, I'm looking at that and I'm not feeling so good about it. But I mean, I don't know. Look, I'm sure there are people, Rob, who are way above our pay scale, certainly way above mine, that are trying to figure all this out. But I just think it's a lot of games, by the way, on both sides. I think there's just a lot of PR gamesmanship being played right now. And we'll just have to wait to see how all these numbers actually start to shake out. Guys, question is, what do you think about all this? Jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right.